This is my family and our story. There are many different ideas and opportunities when it comes to reconciliation within Canada. Individuals and their families have a far more greater impact by sharing their family history and stories of the negative impacts of residential schools from one generation to the next. Sharing the truths are not only an opportunity for understanding and learning, but it's a part of healing. Both my parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and great-great-grandparents have all attended residential schools at various locations across Saskatchewan. I had no idea that my father was a victim of residential school. He was a farmer, band counselor, chief of staff for the Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations, tribal chief of Yorkton Tribal Council, and chief of Kiskus First Nation. Who would have thought this bright, energetic fellow was sexually abused by the age of 7? I believe truth-telling is required and stories need to be shared in order for reconciliation to really take place within families and communities. For truth-telling helped our family to reconcile with one another. The fall of 1960 was the first time my father, Ted, had ever been to residential school. The government official had come to pick him up and he was taken away from his grandfather. He was then driven to Gordon's First Nation, which was a 3-hour drive away. He had cried the whole time, and he had no idea where he was going or who he was with. When he arrived at the school, they had checked his head and deloused him. He then had to take a shower. When he was done showering, they had shaved his head and was given a bundle of clothes to wear. A lady had walked him up to the boys' dorm, which was a big, wide-open room full of beds, and every boy was sitting on their bed. From that day on, everything just became a routine, just like his abuse. His sexual abuse started about a year after he attended residential school, and it had continued on the whole time he was there. His abuser was a lady who was a supervisor, matron, and nurse. Every night, each boy would have to go to the infirmary, which was like a doctor's office. She would purposely make my dad be the last one there, just so she could have her way with him. At that time, he had no idea that what she was doing was wrong. Until he became a teenager, he then realized that what had happened was an awful thing. This is where he began to shut down as an individual, and he began to carry around a lot of shame. Growing up, my childhood was great, but it had many secrets. My mother fought hard to make a good home and life for us children. Even though Dad was the provider, he was an absent father, alcoholic, and was very dysfunctional at times. After he shared his horrific residential school experience, I then began to realize why my father was an alcoholic and had great difficulty showing his love and affection. Sharing his story was the beginning of a new life for not only my father, but his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. We began with family sharing circles, which enabled us to share our feelings and struggles. It helped us to begin to forgive, love, and trust one another again. I know for a fact, if he did not share his story, he would not be with us today. We are the ones who give him that strength, along with his ceremonies. There are times that we get angry and hurt for what has happened to him, but all we can do is find strength and courage within ceremony and each other. Reconciliation is an individual choice, but definitely a rewarding one. I found since our family had reconciled within ourselves and one another, it enabled us to let go of what was, and it encouraged us to be a better version of who we are as people. Rather than to be dysfunctional and with each other, once we learned that we had a choice to move on and let go, it no longer controlled our lives. In order to understand the concept of reconciliation, we need to educate for reconciliation, which is one of the 94 calls to action. Our history has created many issues for our Indigenous individuals, families, and communities across Canada, but it also holds many answers for our future generations. In order to know who we are as a person and country, we must listen and learn the history, because our history is what has shaped us into the person, people, and country that we have become. My name is Amanda Adrian. I'm the second youngest daughter of Ted and Gladys Cusance from Kiskus First Nation. I've decided to listen, learn, and share our story. by learning our history and story of the residential school system within our family has not only helped us reconcile, but it also educated our children, and one day it will be shared with our unborn grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Truth-telling has helped us understand, learn, and heal. One quote that I would like to share with my family and others is, "Healing doesn't mean the damage never existed. It means the damage no longer controls our lives." Miigwech, I hope you enjoyed listening to our story.